History made right here.
Infinity.
Art Farmer, boom. Benny Golson.
Oh yeah, where people were standing,
Charles
yeah.
Mingus, boom.
17 East 126, the building that went down in history.
Harlem, 1958.
This is the spot where on one hot, sunny August day nearly 70-odd years ago, 58 legends of jazz gathered to take what would become the most iconic jazz photo of all time. And true to the spirit of jazz itself, the photo shoot was creative, chaotic, and largely improvised.
I'm Jonathan Kane. I'm the son of Art Kane, who took the photograph, Harlem 1958, also known as Great Day in Harlem.
My name is Theo Croker. I'm a trumpet player and composer, and I play what they call jazz.
Hi, Theo.
Hi, Jonathan.
Good to meet you.
Very nice to meet you, too.
Harlem was the home to jazz in New York City.
Yes, and in the first half of the 20th century, Harlem represented the golden age of jazz music. Jazz great or not, if you could play, Harlem listened.
Of course, Harlem still has its legendary status. You can't cancel Harlem. Every single person in this photo is a hero because they had a career playing jazz. Dizzy Gillespie, Roy Eldridge, Art Farmer, Rex Stewart, Art Blakey, Jimmy Rushing, right?
Jimmy Rushing.
Dizzy Gillespie is one of the greatest trumpet players of all time. He's a trumpet god, one of the greatest musicians. His ability to cross-pollinate over multiple genres, be relevant.
The photo was Art Kane's idea. At the time this photo was taken, Art Kane was not a photographer. So my dad, being a jazz fan, thought if he could come up with a really outrageous idea and pitch it to the editors at Esquire, that it might be a great way to launch the new career he wanted. So he came up with the idea for a group portrait. In music, I don't think anything like this had ever happened before. You know, they just called everybody associated with jazz and said, invite your artists to come. There was no system of RSVP, really. They actually had no idea if anyone was going to turn up. And then he got there that morning. Call time was 10 o'clock, which was phenomenally early for most musicians, jazz musicians, or any musicians. One of the musicians said, man, I never knew there were two 10 o'clocks in the day before.
10 o'clock is probably when most of them go to bed the next day.
That's exactly right.
So they could be on the way home.
Yeah. He got there probably at 9 o'clock and just waited nervously.
The next thing Art Kane knew, there were 58 of the biggest names in jazz turning up to his shoot, possibly because Esquire represented a larger audience for them to be heard. And back in that Harlem street, the overwhelmed young photographer stood wondering what to do next.
It was done with borrowed equipment. And him and his assistant, they're like a couple of bumbling young, super talented guys who just actually were winging it. He took a copy of the New York Times and rolled it into a megaphone shape. And he was holding it up to his mouth going, please, please, take a formation.
And they got it. That one special frame where almost everyone is looking at the camera. I say almost everyone.
Roy Eldridge, I'm sure a trumpet hero of yours. Yeah. He said he was so mad at Dizzy Gillespie because Dizzy is teasing him and sticking his tongue out at him, so he's the only one who's not looking at the camera because Dizzy was teasing him. And he was like,
That's probably
Dizzy.
why Dizzy did it.
Yeah, it's probably.
And that was Dizzy's hero, Roy Eldridge.
Right.
Yeah, so that makes sense.
And then the kids from the neighborhood showed up and started hanging around, and some of the people from Esquire started yelling, get those kids out of here. And Art Kane was like, absolutely not, the kids stay, because they represented the future.
Who's this sitting down there next to the...
That's Count Basie.
Oh, that's what...
That's Basie. Yeah, and one of the great stories was the reason he's holding his hat is one of the kids kept running over and grabbing his hat and running away, and he kept getting up and like chasing the kid to get his hat back. And then finally Count Basie just was like, I'm done chasing this kid around. I'm sitting on the curb with the kids and I'm holding on to my hat. And great story with Monk too, that he chose the white jacket because he figured most people would be wearing black, and he thought he would stand out if he wore the white one. And the other thing he mentioned was that he stood next to Mary Lou Williams and Marion McPartland, because he said, if I stand next to these two beautiful women, more people will look at me than if I'm just with a bunch of guys. You know?
Then there's Eddie Locke, who thought he'd hit the jackpot just by being invited. At the time, the young drummer was relatively unknown on the scene, but he made his way into jazz immortality after a chance meeting with Art Kane's wife while picking up the kids at nursery.
He came around the corner from Fifth Avenue onto 100, and he saw Thelonious Monk, Coleman Hawkins, Dizzy, and he said his knees started shaking, and he was like, I don't belong here, like, I just got here, you know?
Wow, that's great.
And he said he almost ran away. He said he decided to stick around, as nervous as he was, and he took his place in jazz history there.
There were many other musicians who simply couldn't make it, due to being on tour, for example. And while 58 musicians turned up, only 57 are in the famous image.
There was one musician who was here that day and is not in the photo. He's the stride pianist Willie the Lion Smith.
Oh, wow.
And he's in all of the outtakes, but in the frame that became the frame. He's probably sitting on this staircase. He got tired. He was one of the older gentlemen here and was like, I'm sitting down, but unfortunately he missed being in the frame. My dad chose this one because this is the one where everybody's looking, like it all lines up. There's a poetry to this image. It's there in the other frames too, but in this one it's crystallized.
One thing when I see this photo, I can't help but notice how people from totally different styles of jazz are interacting with each other, which is quite interesting, you know. Mary Ellen McPartland and Mary Lou Williams and Thelonious Monk play completely differently, have completely different approaches to playing music, but you know, I'm curious what they talked about. To see that is so fascinating.
This time, 58, people like Charles Mingus here were definitely pushing the edges, boundaries of jazz. They moved the needle. They didn't just play jazz, they created a new form of jazz.
As for Art Kane, well, this photo launched a long and successful photography career, which included another era-defining photo with this shot of The Who draped in the British flag.
I think it's fair to say that that's the most famous picture of The Who, as well as this being the most famous picture in jazz. So, I mean, Art Kane had a knack for creating iconic images that really resonate culturally.
But Harlem 1958 will always be one of his most famous photographs.
It's been recreated dozens of times. The most beautiful, the one that means the most to me, was Gordon Parks's Greatest Day in Hip Hop, same building. But this photograph literally has a life of its own.
This photo represents jazz, with the idea of it to improvise spontaneously without a plan and have to make it work. So it's really a beautiful thing to see.
It was a very magical day and something that will never happen again.
Here it is, number 17.
There it is.
Pop right in.
That's the place.
You can practically feel the vibrations sitting on this stoop. All those people were right here. This spot resonates so strongly. It's really kind of a mind blower to be here.